In this lecture, we're going to take the modal component a step further. We found ourselves in a situation where we decided not to use View's event system to toggle the modal's visibility. We're going to be doing something similar to the previous lecture. Another feature we might want to implement is to disable scrolling. Let me show you what I mean. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to a lorem ipsum generator. This is a tool for generating dummy text. We'll use it to add some content to our app. Click the Generate button to generate some dummy content. Copy the text it generates. Back in the editor, we'll open the app component file. We'll add some paragraph tags below and above the button with the text we copied. Let's view the application in the browser. We'll be able to scroll around the page because of the content we added. If we were to open the modal, we'd still be able to scroll around the page. There aren't rules for how modals should behave. Some apps allow the user to scroll around with the modal open. Others disable the scroll bar. We'll add an option where we can disable the scroll bar on a whim. There are two ways we can handle this. We can disable the scroll bar from the app component. We have a property called show we can use to tell when to disable the scroll bar. The second way is to disable the scroll bar from the modal component. We'll be going with the second approach. The reason is because disabling the scroll bar should be the job of the modal component. It doesn't make much sense for the app component to disable the scroll bar. The scroll behavior is based on whether the modal component is visible. Therefore, the responsibility of handling the scroll bar should be done in the modal component. Another reason is that it makes the modal component reusable. It wouldn't be reusable if we had to disable the scroll bar outside of the component every time we use it. We want the modal component to be something we can drop into a project with minimal hassle. We'll start by updating the modal component file in the editor. As I said before, we'll allow the developer to enable or disable the scrolling behavior. We'll add a prop to the component for allowing them to do so. Yet, we want the prop to be optional. We'll update the props option to an object instead of an array. We'll add a prop called show. We'll make it a required prop because we'll still need to know when to show the modal. Next, we'll add a prop called scrollable. In the options, we'll set the default property to false. If this property is true, the user will be able to scroll around the page. A falsy value will mean scrolling is disabled. The next thing we'll do is check the scrollable property when the modal appears. We can watch the show property to check when the modal is opened. We'll add the watch option to the component. In this option, we'll watch the show prop where we'll accept the new value. Inside the function, we'll create a conditional statement to check if the new value argument is true. This will mean the modal is visible. We'll add onto this statement by also checking if the scrollable property is false. If both checks pass, we'll disable the scroll bar. Here's the problem. We want to disable the scrolling behavior on the entire page, but we're in the component. How do we disable the scroll behavior from the component? We'll do what we did last time. We'll manipulate the document. We aren't going to bind any classes or styles on elements. We can directly mutate the document to achieve what we want. Inside the block, we'll call the document.body.style.setProperty function. This function will allow us to add a CSS property to the document. The arguments for the function are the property and value, respectively. We'll set the overflow property to hidden. The scroll bar will be removed when the modal is visible. We'll want to add it back when the modal is closed. We'll add an else block to the function. In the else block, we'll call the document.body.style.remove property function. This function will remove a CSS property from an element. We'll remove the overflow property from the body tag. We're done. Let's try testing the modal. In the browser, try opening the modal. The modal opens and the scroll bar disappears. This is exactly what we wanted. It's the default behavior of the component. If we close the modal, the scroll bar comes back. Let's try testing if the scroll bar sticks around when we set the scrollable prop to true. Switch to the app component file in your editor. In the template, we'll bind the scrollable prop on the modal component to true. Let's go back to the browser to check the behavior. This time around, we'll be able to scroll around the page. It's perfect. Well, almost. There's one last problem we'll need to fix before we can consider this complete. First, let's look at the issue. Back in the app component, we're going to set the open data property to true. Next, we'll remove the scrollable prop from the modal component in the template. Let's head back to the browser to test the app. Because we're setting the show data property to true, the modal will become visible on the initial page load. The modal is working, but the scroll bar is still around. This shouldn't be the case since we removed the scrollable prop from the component. The default behavior is to remove the scroll bar. So what is going on? Vue doesn't run watcher functions when a component is created. It runs them whenever the properties it's watching changes. This behavior is a problem because the show prop is initially set to true. The watcher function will never run when a property is initially set. We can fix this by changing how we write watchers. Back in the modal component, we're going to update our watcher. We can set watchers to objects instead of functions. We'll add the show property to the watcher option. It'll be set to an object. In this object, we can configure the watcher further. We can set a property called immediate to true. This property will tell Vue to run the watcher function when it's initially set. We can add the function by using the handler option. This option will be set to a function with the new value accepted in. We'll cut and paste the code we previously had for the function in the handler function, and we'll remove the show function. Let's head to the browser to test the app. The modal is opened without the scroll bar as we wanted. We were able to manipulate the scroll behavior from the component. The main takeaway from this should be encapsulating the behavior in the component. We didn't have to make adjustments to the parent component to get this working. The modal component doesn't interfere with external components. It's completely reusable and flexible. Before I end this lecture, I'm going to set the open data property in the app component back to false.